In 2026, I never thought I would say something like this, but what happened to the true champions of yesteryear in the UFC? What happened to John Jones and GSP and Alexander Volkanovski, even though Volk's still repping, Israel Adesanya, Alexandre Pantoja, Merab Dvalishvili, even Kamaru Usman, even Islam. Islam beat the record at lightweight. What happened to champions in the UFC actually defending their belts and making it worth something? Like, what happened to that? You guys have watched this channel. If you've watched my channel, you know that I've been very supportive, big fan of Ilia Topuria. Definitely one of the most skilled fighters we've seen. My biggest gripe with Ilia, probably my only gripe with Ilia, to be honest, is his lack of urgency or need to defend the belt in his respective weight classes. Obviously, I know right now with the 155-pound belt, shit's going on. But at 145, only got one defense. So my biggest gripe on Ilia would just be that. And then now we've got a new one in Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat, he blasted onto the scene in 2020, was just a phenom for all of us to watch and enjoy, and all of us felt like this is the best guy that we could have. This guy's super active. He takes his debut, fights 10 days later, is just smoking dudes. Not only has Khamzat been plagued by a lot of inactivity over the years, I know it's not all his fault in terms of if you really break it down and go through all of the different reschedulings and things of that nature, but regardless, not all of his fault for the inactivity. But Khamzat is probably the only fighter I've seen who's actually campaigning to fight somebody in a different weight class before he's even scheduled a title defense in the weight class where he just won the belt. And what's so annoying about this is there are actually fans who support this sort of behavior. There are fans who are campaigning for him to not defend at middleweight and go to light heavyweight. How, as a fan, and guys, I'm not like, I'm a Khamzat fan, but I am not a diehard Khamzat fan by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like actually in this case, my opinion should mean something, mainly because I'm not biased one way or the other. I don't hate Khamzat yet. I also am not like, this diehard fan. I would say I would lean more towards liking Khamzat than I do disliking Khamzat, but actions like this, where he's on X tweeting at Pereira every fucking chance he can, just salivating over getting a fight with the guy, with no urgency or even care in the world to defend the belt he just won. How in the hell, as a fan, can you support that type of action? Like, I don't understand it. How can you be okay with a guy taking over this new weight class and basically just saying, I'm not going to defend, I'm trying to find a super fight that's outside of this weight class? Like, why and how can you defend that? It's honestly shocking that, like, we're in this day and age, and maybe this whole Paramount era is creating a bunch of brain dead fans. But like, my whole take, guys, is even if you are a diehard Khamzat fan, there's no way in hell you could argue to me how he's worthy of not defending his belt at middleweight and getting a title shot in another weight class. There's no debate or argument that you could even come close to constructing where I would feel it's a valid debate. And so what we're going to do, guys, we're going to break down Mr. Khamzat. And we're going to go through some stuff about Khamzat, and I'm just going to make my case as to why this guy does not deserve to go up to another weight class and fight for another belt before defending his belt. All right, guys, so I've got Khamzat's UFC stats pulled up here, and we're going to go through this. So, as I mentioned, Khamzat comes in the UFC 2020, blitzes through, gets a big debut fight in July 15, 2020 is Khamzat's first matchup in the UFC, and it's against John Phillips. And when we click into this fight, take a look at John Phillips. This fight, Khamzat just dominated. He ends up winning by a Darce choke. But outside of that, let's just take a look at John Phillips. He, before getting to Khamzat, was debut. He lost to Charles Byrd by way of guillotine choke, rear naked choke, Then he lost to Kevin Holland. Then he lost to Jack Marshman. Got his first win after going 0-3. His first win was against Alan Amedovski. And then he goes on to get subbed by Khamzat, and then goes on to lose to Jun Young Park, John Phillips. This was a 185-pound bout, but I guess my whole point in showing you this, although 22-11 in his professional career, John Phillips was 1-5 in the UFC. So that is Khamzat's first middleweight win, 1-0 at middleweight. Khamzat's next fight is a welterweight bout against Rhys McKee. Rhys McKee just recently, I believe, got let go from the UFC, but we're not even going to break this one down because what I'm focused on here is the middleweight weight class. So that's a welterweight bout. That is the one that he took 10 days after beating John Phillips. So now we go on to his second middleweight win, which actually was a decent win. Considering Gerald Meerschaert went on, recently to beat some other, up-and-coming prospects in the middleweight division, like an Edmund Shabazian. Now, Edmund Shabazian has kind of been an up-and-coming prospect for a while because he's so young. But we know GM3. GM3 is a solid guy to go up against Khamzat at this time. Gets a win, 2-0 as a middleweight. Khamzat then goes on to have a pretty consistent run in the welterweight weight class. Gets a win over, Jin Liang, which we saw. Then he gets a win over Gilbert Burns. Then gets a win over Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland was not a welterweight bout because Khamzat missed weight. It wasn't middleweight either, but regardless. So 2-0 at middleweight, Khamzat now finally gets his third middleweight bout, which is on short notice against the legend Kamaru Usman. Now, take this fight as you will. There's a lot of fans who are on opposite sides of the coin, believing, Kamaru won the fight. I do believe Khamzat won the fight. Close fight, though. And for his third win at middleweight, he ever so slightly, based on the majority decision and based on a lot of fans' opinions, he just ever so slightly scrapes by. Gets a win over a guy who's not a true middleweight. Khamzat then goes on as a 3-0 middleweight to take on Robert Whittaker. And now this win is there's no asterisk in my opinion. There's no way you can discredit this. People want to say, oh, Whittaker was already injured. No, like Whittaker had an injury from when he was a child, and I love Whittaker to death, but Whittaker also let Khamzat take his back and crank on that jaw, right? So you can't discredit Khamzat for that. So Khamzat gets his fourth win at middleweight against Robert Whittaker, a beautiful win for Khamzat. And then he finally goes on and he finally gets that title shot. Not finally. I mean, he only was 4-0 at middleweight, and the only ranked guy he beat at middleweight was Robert Whittaker. So he has one ranked win in the middleweight division. Goes on to, oh my God. Wow. Guys, I did not fucking know this. Khamzat goes on to fight Dricus. He threw 37 strikes in a 5-round bout. Wow. Now, a stellar performance, an absolute domination by way of Khamzat. 12 takedowns, 37 strikes. Dricus only threw 13, so Dricus got dominated. But first of all, the fact that Khamzat got a performance bonus for this is utter bullshit in my opinion. Like, so many fighters on that card deserve that performance bonus over him, in my opinion. You didn't finish the fight. You literally just laid on top of your opponent. I understand the skill set it takes to be able to have that type of pressure and control, but that's not a performance bonus worthy performance. It's just not. I mean, the guy threw more strikes against Usman with 2 less rounds. I mean, he threw almost the full amount of strikes that he threw against Dricus in 1 round against Li Jinliang. And then also, he threw 40 strikes in 1 round against Rhys McKee. So he threw more strikes in 1 round than he did in 5 at a championship level. Regardless, Khamzat gets the belt. He's the champion. But to look at that, 5-0 at middleweight, and actually sit here and try and muster up some sort of debate or argument for Khamzat to be ushered into another weight division and go for the belt there is the most ludicrous shit I've seen and heard from some of the fans in this community. I can't even fathom how there is any type of debate for this matchup. Khamzat is just simply undeserving of a second title shot at this point. And if you ask me, I even believe he needs 1 to 2 defenses at middleweight before moving on. Now, if I'm being real, I think that because Ilya KO'd Max Holloway in dominant fashion, a guy who'd never been KO'd, beautiful defense, the guy who was the GOAT of the featherweight outside of Volkanovski, of course, because Volkanovski has taken the throne as the GOAT of the featherweight division, in my opinion. But to beat Max the way he did, something no one else in the UFC has been able to do, beating Max by KO, that is, that at least gives you the ability to argue, like, okay, like he knocked out a legend, but Khamzat, he just beat Dricus. Dricus was a formidable champion, got a few defenses. But are we really going to elevate Khamzat that much? And what's so funny, guys, there's this narrative that's going around from, I have to think they're diehard Khamzat fans. The narrative is that, well, there's no like competition for Khamzat at middleweight. There's just no competition for Khamzat at middleweight. So like, it doesn't matter. First of all, what kind of fucking logic is that? Imagine if we used that logic when GSP was a welterweight champion. Imagine if we used that logic when John Jones was in his reign as the light heavyweight champion. Oh, there's just no competition for John at light heavyweight. That's not how it fucking works, okay? So we don't have to dive into that too much, but let's just expand on that a little bit more. People's opinion is that there's just no competition for Khamzat at middleweight, so let him go to light heavyweight. This guy has 5 wins at middleweight. He beat one ranked in one real middleweight before he got his title shot. He's only been locked in the cage with 2 ranked middleweights. How can you have that opinion that there's no competition for him just because he beat Robert Whittaker and Dricus? There's no one in the middleweight division that could give him problems at all. No one, because he beat those 2 guys. He hasn't fought anyone else in the middleweight division. I can name a few guys that would probably make it a hard matchup for Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I know everybody thinks he's the next coming of Jesus when it comes to the grappling. He's very good at that. But guys, he has not been tested by another lifelong or super strong grappler in the middleweight division who's a true middleweight. I know he was tested against Kamaru. Kamaru's not a middleweight. If you really think that Khamzat Chimaev is just going to completely ragdoll everybody and beat them all, he should be able to do that by way of a finish, right? So if you really believe Khamzat is that dominant and there's no competition, then in my opinion, Khamzat better go out there and defend that middleweight belt. And just like you guys say, and I know I'm not speaking to you guys who are probably fans or subscribe to the channel, talking about the people who have this type of logic. If you believe there's no one that's true comp at middleweight, then it should be a piece of cake for Khamzat to go out there and fight 2 times this year. He should be able to finish both of those fighters, whoever they may be, at middleweight. And then he can go on his merry way to whatever division he wants and show us if that same skill set applies to a heavier weight class. In my opinion, guys, I'm not the type of person who just looks at this sport and looks at a division and goes, oh yeah, I don't think anybody is good enough to beat Ilya, so he should just be able to move on. No, you know how I look at it? Talk is cheap, actions speak louder than words. If you're that guy, go prove it to us. If Khamzat is that guy who became the new king of middleweight and is just somehow so good that no one in middleweight would ever give him any problems, prove it to me. Because at this point, he hasn't. Beating 2 guys who are very good and formidable middleweight opponents, but 2 only. And then when I say 2 only, it's the 2 guys that are Dricus and Robert Whittaker, who were the only 2 that were ranked when Khamzat fought them. He didn't have to fight a Jared Cannonier. He didn't have to fight a Gregory Rodriguez. He didn't have to fight a Anthony Hernandez. Didn't have to fight an RDR. He didn't have to fight Brendan Allen. And look, I know that a lot of these guys, they're not like the next GOAT, running for the GOAT contest. But what they all are guys who are actually bigger than Khamzat in some respects, right? So you have RDR, who's taller than Khamzat, probably weighs the same amount as Khamzat. You have a guy in Brendan Allen who's the same height as Khamzat and pretty big, thick, also has very good ground game. Same with RDR. You have a guy in Anthony Hernandez who I think is a little bit smaller than Khamzat, but also has a very good wrestling background, also a very good kickboxer. You have a guy in like Jared Cannonier, although, he is definitely up there in age at this point. But Cannonier, physically strong, a little bit smaller, but physically strong. I think that Khamzat would probably give him a lot of issues, though, just given where Cannonier's at age-wise. No disrespect, love to kill a gorilla. But let's expand on another one. Nasruddin Imavov, who I might have already mentioned, but Nasruddin Imavov is taller than Khamzat, going to be about the same weight, maybe a little bit less, but a guy who has very solid kickboxing, also very good wrestling defense. But like I said before, you also have a Gregory Rodriguez, a guy who has that one-shot KO power. Obviously, Khamzat could potentially take him down, exploit him in the wrestling, but even like a Michael Venom Page, who obviously is not the greatest of grapplers, right? But Khamzat hasn't had to fight any of these guys. Kyle Bahalio, another one. Another guy who's a big middleweight, could give Khamzat issues when it comes to his ability to grapple and also have submissions on the ground. I'm not saying that Khamzat won't beat these guys, but if these guys are the guys that you say offer no competitive fight to Khamzat, then in my opinion, Khamzat should have no issue defending that belt 2 times this year and moving on. I'm not going to support these guys don't look like they'd give him a hard time, so you can just go ahead and move up and it's okay. This isn't the fucking Conor McGregor show anymore. And to be honest, guys, as much as Conor's done for the sport, the guy's legacy, when you really break it down, is winning a belt in 2 different weight classes and never defending it. And most, I would say, diehard or true fans of MMA don't really give a lot of credence to guys who just won a belt and didn't get a title defense. We've seen it happen all the time. But even then, you also have a guy in Sean Strickland, doesn't use wrestling, obviously, but he's a very great defensive wrestler, very good at getting back to his feet. Also a very tricky customer when it comes to the striking department. Not only is his jab A1, everyone wants to bitch and talk shit about Sean Strickland. Oh, he does his jab and teep. Well, the same ones that will fucking love to watch a nut-hugging lay on top of you for 25 minutes fight. Sean Strickland has one of the best jabs in MMA. His Philly shell is definitely a weird style, but guys have an extremely hard time striking with Sean Strickland. I think several of these fighters will give Khamzat tough fights in the sense that if you guys believe Khamzat is as dominant as he is and that these guys offer up no competition, Khamzat should have no issue finishing them. So if we are lucky enough to see Khamzat go out there and actually defend the middleweight belt multiple times, he better finish all of them dominantly. Because based on how a lot of people are speaking on Khamzat's skills that have only really been shown against 2 ranked middleweights, you guys think that this guy is untouchable and he's like a Terminator of this division. He better dominantly finish all of them, in my opinion, then. That is just how I feel. But to sit there and act like none of these guys can offer up anything, even Joe Pyfer might actually be a tough matchup for Khamzat in the fact that Joe Pyfer has shown to have pretty solid ground game, pretty decent wrestling. I mean, obviously, it's nowhere near the wrestling that Khamzat's going to bring. But in reality, Khamzat hasn't gone up against a fighter yet in the middleweight division who he didn't outsize. He goes up against a Joe Pyfer, and that's a guy who's virtually identical to Khamzat in probably weight inside the octagon and also height. I don't know, guys. I think it's absolutely nuts. I know I've spent a lot of time discussing this. I wanted to really go through this and break it down because it's just fucking ridiculous to think that you can win a belt. And do we even know when Khamzat's fighting next? I know he's supposed to be fighting it. He's campaigning to fight Alex Pereira at the White House, which is bullshit. But that's my take. It's my opinion. Would love to hear from you guys. Let me know your thoughts. Comment below. Give the video a like. I will see you all in the next one.